That'd be nice. No, I cannot afford that. But brother,
Yeah, me neither,
hey,
man.
brother, thanks for joining me on the podcast and having a chat. And I know you've been
Thanks for
everywhere
having
on
me.
social media and been chatting.
Well, not everywhere. I'm very picky about who I speak with, so
Oh, bloody. Why are you speaking to me then, mate? But how's your day going? How are you?
I'm very, very tired because any sort of downtime I get, I spent in training. So even like after rotation, when we are given a few weeks off to relax, that's a cue for me to go do some gyms, QB training, just to improve myself because I just can't sit on my ass more than 2 hours. So,
Yeah. So can you tell us, we're doing this interview very late at night for you. Can you tell us like what you've been doing this evening?
all right, well, this evening today I did some CQB training with like professional staff guys who, instructors, to just brush up on skills, not get rusty. And after that, I met some volunteers trying to organize some equipment for me and my team. Just the usual, no rest for the wicked.
No, mate, very, very bloody busy. And how do you, I guess, cope with all of this, I guess, intensity and then, of course, trips to the front line? How does that go for you?
Well, I mean, mostly there's a difference. Not a lot, not a whole lot affects me in terms of like stress because growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, Georgia, which at the time was like a failed state, no food, no heating, no water, no nothing, it kind of hardens you. So I have kind of detached emotionally from most of the things. So in terms of like in combat and all that, I tend to remain really cool. Like I don't see any faces when I sleep. None of that. My stress levels it's just extra aggression more than usual. But if you ever met a Georgian, you know that aggression is our mother tongue. So it's very normal for Georgians to be very explosive, right? But yeah, it's even more pronounced with me. But they made gym for that, so every time I get a free second, I spend it powerlifting because that's my drug. Like benching 210 kilos. So that's where I put my rage in. So I'm always.
Ah, that's awesome. And what are your powerlifting numbers at the moment? You said 210 bench.
So I competed in bench before this war.
Yeah.
I came to Ukraine at 92 kilo body weight, the biggest I've ever been, and consider I'm like 5'4" on a good day. So 92 kilos, I was like thick,
Yeah, you're a thick
thick,
boy at that. Yeah.
and yeah, and I came like I was jacked, and I did 210 is my personal record on bench.
Yeah.
And on competition, I was going to do 195 comfortably, uh, but then like the war happened literally 2 days before the competition, so I kind of left everything, came here, and I don't think I can get back to that career with my injuries anymore. But yeah, we'll see.
Bloody. We would in the Australian Army, mate, we would have referred to you as a combat wombat, just a little muscle ball.
That's a very Aussie way to put it. That's true. Yeah,
Oh shit.
yeah. Battle dwarf.
Battle dwarf. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you tell us a bit about your background, like where you grew up and where you started, I guess, militarily before you got to Ukraine, before I guess the 22
Mhm.
invasion?
Born and bred in Georgia, harshest land, and basically, well, childhood-wise, I mean, like I was born in '94, and Georgia had just had three civil wars orchestrated by Russia at that point. And we had basically growing up no food, no water, no heating. It was a horrible place. Mafia ran the country, like what Hollywood movies show as Russian mafia. It's not Russian, it's Soviet and most of the bosses are Georgian, like 65% of them, and they basically ran the country at that point. And yeah, it wasn't a good time at all. Luckily, my father worked his ass off to provide for me, and I went to a good school, considering the circumstances, and I actually got a chance to go abroad. Like I told you before, I was in Timor for 2 years, and I went to an Aussie school. That's mostly where my English comes from, I suppose. And yeah, as soon as 12th grade, I was supposed to go to another like abroad school and then university and all that. But I always wanted to be in the military since like 9/11, because when 9/11 happened, because I'm a said, like I'm from Georgia and America is the whole planet away, right? But I was in 2001, I was 6, almost 7 years old, right? And my father and I were moving houses, apartments, and I helped him bring him up the TV, and he told me to plug it in. I turn it on, and I see this tower smoking. I thought it's a movie, right? And the next channel, same, next channel, same. And then my father was like, wait, and that's like BBC or something. And he was listening to it, and I didn't understand at the time. And then he explained to me, I didn't know the concept of terrorism and all that, right? A 7-year-old. And what I remember is that I was fucking terrified, because I thought, if anybody can do that in the United States, I felt unsafe being out, out about in the world, if anybody can do that to the United States. So in my mind, just I suppose coming from the Georgian culture, being as a very paladin centric culture, like do the right thing and like integrity and all that. So I always had this feeling of standing up to evil, and that was my mentality growing up. And then the 2008 war happened, and like I was 12 years old, I think, and that whole war just went over on top of my head. It was a horrible experience, really. And that was basically the final cue that I decided, well, I can be a guy who blogs about this, or I can be the guy who stands up to evil and kills it. Because to me there is no negotiation with evil. The only cure for evil is a bullet. So that was my mentality. And as soon as I finished school, I immediately enrolled in the military academy of Georgia, and trained to become an infantry officer. Did that for 4 years. Did some time in a recce company, and then I got out. I mean, we can discuss that at length, the problems with the Georgian military, why they would simply not want a guy like me there. But yeah, so then Afghanistan, 2 years as a PMC.
Yeah.
And yeah, after that, then during COVID, when Afghanistan kind of shrank down because of COVID, and then Biden happened, and that amazing withdrawal that I will never forget, because I served on HKaya,
Yeah.
the base that the people follow from. Yeah, I served there, and yeah, it was just watching that 20 years of so much blood and everything, and it just going down to trash in 2 weeks. It was just infuriating, because you understand, Georgia is not a NATO country. It's 3.5 million population. At its highest, 30,000 military, and we had the third largest contingent of troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. After US and Britain, it was Georgia. And both per capita and by sheer like net number, we had 2,000 people in rotation, and so many people lost. And for what? For 2 weeks they just, and yeah, I was already in Georgia when that happened. And yeah, and then this war kicked off. So to me it was never a question, like I've built myself to be the antidote to the poison that is Russia, my whole life. And I expected it to be in Georgia, honestly, because it's easier target than this giant country, right? But it happened in Ukraine, and honestly, I don't need a reason. I'll fight the Russians on moon if I have to. Like, you show me a Russian to fight, it doesn't matter where for me.
Yeah. And you grew up with this constant, I guess, threat of Russia in the background. Like,
Yeah, I mean, look, you can see their bases when you drive. Like on the main magistral, if you go from the capital, Tbilisi, which is in the center, if you go west to the sea, for example, in the summer, all you have to do is look right and you see the Russian bases, like 10 clicks off the main highway.
yeah.
And when I studied in the military academy, it's literally on the other side of the highway. And like you literally, when you wake up, you see the Russians. So it's like the constant threat, like anything you plan in life, be it personal life or business or anything, a factor you have to consider that, okay, I will build this nice warehouse, but tomorrow the Russians may bomb it. You have to constantly keep that in the back of your head. So, and the whole generations are raised in this. So,
And do you think that
that's why we have, yeah, that's why we have 4,000 Georgians fighting in Ukraine now.
yeah. And do you think as like a whole that, Georgia and young Georgians are very, very hostile towards Russia for the history there, and that's why you've then got this massive contingent?
300 years, basically, since Russia became a thing, they have been invading Georgia, well, Caucasus as a whole, but Georgia specifically, because we are the rebel nation, right? We're the warrior nation here, as in the Chechens mostly. And they've always been invading us. First, it was the Russian Empire. And if you want a brief history recap for your audience, basically during the Russian Empire of the Queen Catherine, right? Both Georgia and the Russian Empire were at war with Iran. And we have the same religion, Eastern Orthodoxy, right? So it made sense to be allies against the common enemy, right? We have the same religion and we have the same enemy, right? And one of our kings, Henry II, he made a deal with the Russians that, okay, let's fucking ally and fight Iran together. And then when the battle came, Russians left us alone, of course. Iran overran Georgia and like basically ravaged the country, and then king died of old age, and then Russia just swooped in and took over the country, made it a province. And the interesting fact is that you gotta understand Georgia is an ancient country, right? I mean, the reason why people are called Caucasian, people like you, is because their ancestors moved from Caucasus to the west, right, to Europe. My ancestors stayed in the Caucasus and been living there for thousands of years. And we've been invaded by everybody. Alexander the Great, the Pompeius Magnus of Rome, like everybody, right? Mongols, Timurids, Arabs, Turks, like everybody. Nobody has done more damage culturally and ethnically than the Russians. Even though we had the same religion, they destroyed Georgian churches, which date back to 5th century. And they had like hand-painted mosaics and frescoes inside on the walls, and they painted it all white because they wanted to Russify the nation. They wanted to destroy the Georgian identity as a whole. So it's like it can never be recovered, that legacy, right? It's not for just Georgia, but all of humanity, it's just completely erased. And then the empire broke down and became the Soviet Union. And of course, Georgian in charge, Stalin. In 21, they came in and they murdered everyone who could read or write. That was the bar. Or are you a peasant, or do you have formal education? Or you can read against the wall, shot, or in Siberia. Anyone who could lead people, actors, painters, writers, poets, politicians, journalists, everybody just decapitated the society. And then 70 years of Soviet slavery, and yeah, so it's basically safe to say that for us, the hatred towards Russia and Russians is just in the blood.
And does that go, you know, for someone like yourself, does that go towards just your average Russian civilian too? Do you see a difference between those who are soldiers, politicians, and civilians, or is it just your culture as a whole?
It depends. I have no problem with some Russian babushka, of course, right? I'm not genocidal towards them, but there's this thing, right? If there is a bear in the forest that every 5 years comes out and eats half of the population of the village, you either fence off the village or you kill the bear. There is no third option, right? You either have to contain it or kill it, right? There is no third option. And it is not the Russian government that's at fault here. It is not the Russian, the Putin, right? People say, I hate it when the Western media says Putin's war. Like Putin wasn't an idea when Soviet Union was doing this. Putin wasn't even an idea when the Russian Empire was doing this. Russian Empire didn't exist when the Principality of Muscovy was doing this, right? They are just an imperialistic, chauvinistic, genocidal people. That's who they are. They don't have anything their own, right? And they just destroy. They are a terrible mix of Mongols and Slavs. You know, they got this Slavic arrogance mixed with Mongol ambition. And it's a very dangerous mix. And they actually believe that they have a right to take whatever the fuck they want. And you speak to an average Russian, they will tell you this. This is why every time Putin's ratings fall, he starts a war. Because they may not have food and heating, but as long as they see on TV that the might of Russia is bombing some poor country, you know, and stealing toilet seats, it makes them proud. So it is not the government, it is the people. Because there's 141 million Russians in Russia. If they wanted Putin gone, he would be gone. It's not even a question, you know. But they like this. Vast majority of them, as you can see in all the polls, support the war.
Mm. And where were you when October the 24th happened, and what were your initial feelings towards what you saw?
October 24th?
February the 24th. Sorry, I'm covering both
You went to Gaza, right?
I was thinking October the 7th for Israel and February the 24th for Ukraine. I'm all over the place.
Right. Yeah. So I was in Georgia, actually. I had just started a new job, a pretty good job, actually, that paid very well, and I could just work from home, you know. And I knew the war was coming as soon as they started trainings on the trainings on the border, right? That's the cue. Because I mean, we've been through this 4 times since 1991. Russia had 4 wars with Georgia, so we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, you know. So yeah, I know. And I was watching like the Western media claim that no, it's not going to happen. But when you have an extremely weak administration in the United States, it's always a very lucrative possibility for evil people, you know. And I knew it was going to happen. Ukrainians knew it was going to happen. That's why they prepared. And yeah, I knew it was coming. And as soon as it began, the reason why I didn't go before is because I have never met a living Ukrainian before this war. I have no relations with Ukraine, right? And I didn't even know who to talk to. Like I can just get on a plane in like February 2nd and fly to Kyiv and like I don't know, go where the Ministry of Defense high. Like I don't know how the process works, right? And I was just waiting because I knew it was gonna be a big invasion, and eventually they would announce something like the Legion. So I was waiting for like the legal way to go there, not just some show up and be like some kind of a war profiteer and mercenary kind of character, right? No, I just want to enlist, and I just waited for the opportunity. And Zelensky announced it on 26th, I believe. Yeah, the Legion. And immediately the very next day I went to the embassy in Tbilisi. And it's actually a funny story. I gave them my details, right? My background, that I speak 4 languages and I've been here, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, like, I knew they were going to accept me, obviously, but I was thinking, like, maybe they'll have to vet me, background check me, you know, etc. What if I'm an FSB agent, right? Who knows? So I was expecting they would tell me, like, okay, we'll call you in about a week, right? And this guy looks at me and says, okay, be in the airport at 6 p.m. and it's 2 p.m. right now. So I'm like, but today? And he's like, yes, like legit. And I just run out of the embassy, go home, pack my stuff, go to the airport, and we had like 200 battle-hardened Georgians, like who fought like several deployments in Kandahar, in Iraq, you know, like really, really tough guys. And in full equipment, I mean, in everything, just ready to go. And a Polish flight was supposed to land and take us to Lviv, where we would be like processed and everything. And the Georgian government, which is very, very pro-Russian, pretty much in FSB nomenclature is the Georgian government, and they did not let the plane land. They turned it around.
Wow.
And yeah, and at that point, I immediately went to the kiosk and bought a commercial ticket to Warsaw for the next day for Poland. And the next day, 27th, I believe, Zelensky recalled the Ukrainian ambassador from Georgia. And from there, the Ukrainian embassy was inaccessible. You couldn't even call them for any information. It just stopped working, you know, because it was a huge panic, like what's going on. So I just went to Poland. I found the Ukrainian embassy in the Polish capital, and I just knocked on the door and I said, hey, I'm this and that. I want to go fight. And this guy came out giving me a piece of paper, like a torn piece of paper with a number on it. I called that number, and there's some guy on the other end, and he messages me at Google drop pin where to be at what time. It's very fucking James Bond, you know, like very, very, it was very sketchy, I gotta say. And yeah, I made it to there, and there was like a bus available, and they just put us on the bus and took us into country, and the journey began.
And how quickly before, going into country, before you were then, on the front line in combat with the Russians?
3rd of March, I was in Kiev. 5th of March, I was in combat.
Wow. So was there any vetting of like who you are, who you say you are, any training?
None. At that point, there was basically all hands on deck. So, for example, I'll give you an example. Now it's very, very organized, right? Now you have to go to the website, send an email, and the whole thing. Unless you are directly recruited by a team, like I can, for example, recruit you, and then you come to Kiev, and I take you by hand and take you to my commander, and it's a much faster process. But if you don't have that, you have to go through the official process, and even if I directly recruit you, you still have to wait about a few weeks for your background checks and everything. So they take this thing very, very seriously now, and you have to go through training and everything, and so it's more organized now. When I came here, there was like this military base in the western Ukraine that got bombed later. And people there, I know people who've been there for like 3-4 weeks waiting to be cleared. I spent exactly 30 minutes on that base.
Wow.
I went there. They asked me a couple of questions. Okay. They looked at me and said that they had no clothes in my dimensions. They don't make dwarf size clothes, short and wide. So they gave me an army cap. That's it. And an AK-47, and put me on a bus and sent me to Kiev. And the next day we had the ability, luckily, to go to a range in Kiev to zero the weapons. And I had to run that range because there were a lot of Georgians. So I spoke Georgian, I speak Russian, I speak English and French. So all these languages, I had to explain to everybody how to zero an AK at a 25-meter range. and like I'm an AK fanatic, so luckily I knew how to do that. And I had to run that range in 5 languages, basically, just for everybody. And we zeroed the weapons, and very next day we already departed for Moshun.
Wow. And how was, I guess, your first contact with the Russian forces? Like when and who were the forces?
Horrendous. It was the worst experience I've ever had in my life.
Right.
So you gotta understand that because it was such a new unit, so many different people, different nationalities, different levels of training, different languages. Some people like didn't speak English. Some people, it's a whole like most Georgians don't speak English. So like there were only a few of us who were multiple lingual who could like bridge that connection, right? And well, obviously that was a big issue, and that's another issue was the equipment that was given was obviously like the army standard equipment, right? That came from like warehouses and stuff. So it was very varying degrees. Like I had my own everything because this is my life, like if I have $2 extra I spend on equipment, right? I'm a fanatic of that thing. But like some people came pretty much naked and they were issued whatever they were issued. So it was like very hit or miss. And I mean, it is no fault of the Ukrainian logistics. Nobody expected thousands of foreigners to just flood the border in the first few days, and no logistic is ready for that, But they issued everyone basic PPE, helmet plate, carrier plates, and weapons, obviously. And so we go to this village. Now, granted, at the time, I had no idea where we were going. I had no idea about. There was like zero brief because the Kiev was surrounded in double envelopment at the time. So any sort of information leakage would have been disastrous. So it was like need to know basis, everything, right? And we get to some village that's under fire. We get out of these trucks and they tell us that we have to rush to the fighting positions. So leave your backpacks with all the food in it and all the heavy weapons, ammunition like machine gun, and just march like 5 kilometers, 6 kilometers through a forest. And naturally, not everybody is on the same level of fitness, So there were people who were falling behind. And basically, I took it upon myself to hang behind and just shepherd these people in the general direction of forwards, And it got dark because you gotta understand there's like light for 3 hours when it's winter here. It gets dark at like now it's what, January, 4 p.m. is dark already. So early March is pretty much the same, So it got dark real fast, and it's minus 17 degrees Celsius, freezing cold, man. This whole country is a steppe, as you know. So like the wind does whatever it wants to do. There is nothing getting in the way. So it's freezing, and basically it got dark. We got separated. So the forward element made it, and we are just stumbling in the dark. We took contact somewhere along the lines, and we just finally made it to this pre-dark trenches. And basically, we just picked random holes to just survive the night. And in the morning, we can, consolidate and realize and figure out what's going on. And like the artillery never stopped I was there for 5 days and 5 nights. The IDF from the Russians never stopped, not once. There was no moment of peace. It was just constant. So this village of Moshun is like a dacha. Do you know what a dacha is?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically holiday houses for rich people, right? And it's right on the Irpin River's bank. And on the other side was the Russian BTG, so that's a full battalion combat group. There was the airborne, the VDV airborne, the crown jewel of their military. There was the Alpha Spetsnaz, and basically all the tactical assets, including artillery of every caliber you can imagine, from 60 millimeters to 203 millimeter peons, grads, everything. They had access to helicopters, they had access to airstrikes, and we had my AK-47. So that was the that was the balance of power, right? So the very first night, I decided to like move a little bit forwards to like a forward position, 20 meters from the trench. So to like ask for password when somebody passed, and I hear in my peltors, I heard an engine, and I called back car, for everybody to wake up and be on point. And suddenly, two BMPs just rolled in front of, like 5 meters from me, with their lights off, no flags, no markings, and I'm just sitting there like a mushroom under a tree with an AK, right? And I'm thinking like, they can't see me because their lights are off, but like, what can I do? I just have a rifle, and I just crawled to the side, so I had like line of fire on the doors, because the doors that open are behind, right? And my plan was, as soon as it like opens, I'm going to just empty a magazine inside, and it will just wake everybody up, and they have a chance. Doors open, and the fucking British come out with their silly accents, and yeah, you're silly cunt, something like that. It just, bro, I almost killed every one of them in there. Like, that was very intense moment, because I was just safety off on full auto, just waiting, doors opening, just fucking northern Brits, the paradise, will just jump out, because of course the Brits delivered to the battlefield on the vehicle I had to march 6 kilometers for, you know. Yeah, so yeah, then the very next day, the Legion commander like handpicked a few of us to go to the kill house. I'm sure you know about the kill house. Everybody calls it that these days.
Can you tell us about this specifically?
So, what is known as the kill house is one of those dacha houses that was about 200 meters ahead of the main trench line, inside the village of Moshur. So we took that house. We put two American snipers on the second floor for Overwatch, and they were like, one of them was a Ranger sniper, and the other one also a tier 2 unit sniper. Very, very good shooters. And I think at least they killed 20, 30 plus, just the snipers. And the rest of us, about 10 in total, plus the Ukrainian officer, we were just basically the security for the snipers, right? And the commander also had the radio to call in any artillery assets we had, etc., etc. And for 5 days, basically, we were in that house, and the Russians threw everything they had at that house. But we repelled every single assault, and we had like I'm sure you know Ryan, the war hobo, right? The white Hajj, one of the Americans here. Yeah, and he was like shooting laws out of windows, just because there was no time to get the law and go outside. Like, we were just concussion after concussion for everybody, because they were sending these waves after waves. The good thing is, because the bridges were destroyed by the Ukrainian SOF during the retreat, they could not effectively bring any of their armor and vehicles over, so they had to fight as man to man, right, in urban environment. And I expected much more from VDV, but they were just completely shit at it in terms of like small unit tactics. They had none. They came forward like fucking sheep, and our snipers were just picking them off. And anytime they got close, they got shot back with laws and everything. I got one of them in the roof. I think it was a spotter or a sniper. He was shooting from there, and I put an RPG in that. and the whole ceiling collapsed on him. I'm pretty sure he did not walk away from that. And basically 5 days, 5 nights, it was complete hell. Like you got basically no sleep. And I remember at that time we had no night visions, just one handheld thermal vision, and it was very, very difficult, freezing cold, very little in terms of food, but yeah, we didn't give him an inch. They could not push us out. Basically, they destroyed the entire village of Mushun because they could not push us out. They just bombed it with aviation. And the very last day, before we were rotated out, uh, the commander was in the back organizing something, so we had no radio available, so no orders, and the house took a direct hit from the enemy artillery. And I just said, if we take another hit like that, this building is coming down. So I told everybody to get the stuff and bug out back to the trenches, which we did. And immediately after, last man was out, basically, which was me, and we left the garage. There's like house, and behind the house the garage. As when we went through the garage, that house got completely demolished, and there is literally nothing standing in that village now. But they never managed to take Mushun. That's basically where we stopped the advance on Kiev, and then in the following 3 weeks we counterattacked in Irpin, and after clearing Irpin, the Battle of Kiev was over. They just fucked off.
And you mentioned that, the VDV were not to the standard that you thought. Are there any Russian elements that you fought or have fought that are, good, competent soldiers? Because I hear there's a lot of varying degree in their training, their ability, and competency, unit to unit.
I would say the biggest issue, the biggest problem for me up until this point was Wagner in Bakhmut. And I'm talking about the professional side of Wagner, not the prisoner guys from the Russian prisons who were used as cannon fodder and meat shield. No, I'm talking about the proper Spetsnaz guys who retired and then got a job in Wagner because it paid 6 times as much. Those guys, they were on point. Their equipment was on point, their movement and everything. They were a pretty decent fighting force. It's just when you have, they still have Russian commanders who have absolute values like zero for their lives. The cheapest commodity in Russia is human life. So they were just thrown at impossible odds. Like if you are assaulting a group like mine who will stand and fight, and not only that, that they will just bait you to attack them, to get you to come close so we can kill you better, and then you send the guys and they have to assault my building. It doesn't matter how well trained you are. I have a building, I have machine guns in there, and I'm not gonna get scared, seeing you. On the contrary, so yeah, we killed a lot of them in Bakhmut. They lost like 25,000 plus, Wagner alone. So I would say they definitely were the top tier, what I've seen from Russia, as well as their armor units. Their tankers are pretty good. Generally speaking, their tankers can work. They know their way around their tanks, especially the new models, the new T90s, 80s, 72Ts. And the crews are actually professional, but in terms of general infantry, like very, very low tier in terms of everything.
Right. And have you had, I guess, any really close calls yourself when
I think
almost...
we froze.
Oh yeah, we have. Let's see if that fixes. All right, there you go. I was going to ask, have you had any really close calls yourself when you've almost been, taken out, when you've come out and thought, oh shit, I almost lost it then?
Too many times, man. Too many times to recall. The commander of the legion jokingly calls me the immortal Georgian, or the unkillable Georgian, to translate in English roughly, because like everything has happened to me at this point, and the Russian propaganda has declared me dead 5 times, and I've miraculously resurrected. Yeah, like to give you a few examples, in Bakmut, for example, a Russian T-90 buried me inside the building, just came out and shot us 18 times, destroyed the whole building. The 16th shell got me. I got a pretty sizable shrapnel in my spine. And yeah, that was I would say pretty close. One time in a Lysychansk, after completing an op, we were exfiltrating like 72 hours, no, 48 hours basically. I haven't eaten, I haven't slept. So as soon as I get in our soft skin vehicle to get out, right, I just put my head in it and just fall asleep completely, because I'm already in green zone in my, in my mind on like moving on the road, right? Already behind our lines, right? And then out of nowhere, like serious shelling starts, and we had a head-on collision, pressed like this. So I had like broken ribs and all that, like my eye almost got popped out. Luckily, my head is made of hard stuff, so I think I broke the car more than the car broke me. And yeah, that put me out of the fight for at least a month. Because like, yeah, that's just a couple to mention. But honestly, in this war with the drones and everything, every time you go out is a dice roll. You can be the top tier super trooper, but one $200 FPV drone can just take you out, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, that's something that we've seen, time and time again. And I talk with my friends about this. There's a degree of just so much luck in this war that you could be the best
Oh yeah,
SAS commando bloke ever, but it's not going to matter if there's a drone after you that can go 150 kilometers an hour.
yeah. And look, you gotta understand something, that the NATO doctrines, right? The Georgian military is still structured on NATO standard, right? Even though we're not NATO, but we're trying, so we structure our military, and the doctrines are all translated from the NATO textbooks to fit the Georgian environment. But whatever trainings I've been with abroad, like I trained in France in their military academy and everything, none of it has drones in its doctrines, because they just were not used until this war to this extent. So we still have things like covert movement and company deliberate assault and all that. It's just out of the window. That stuff doesn't work anymore, because before you go to your line of deployment, if I'm translating this right from Georgian to English, before you go to your line of deployment, you are already under fire. You are already taking FPV drones, you're taking IDF, you're taking mortars. And especially in a flat environment like this, there's basically no covered movement. You deploy in combat. So forget about sneaky beaky maneuvers. Oh, this is my fixing unit and this is my maneuvering unit. No, as soon as that maneuvering element begins movement, they get bombed the fuck out with the FPV drones. So there is no, yeah, this is not like a jungle where you can just, do that stuff. It's very different. So I think this war will force the Western military minds to completely reassess, reevaluate, and rewrite the doctrines. Just it's a completely different cup of tea.
Yeah, and we've seen this that a lot, because myself with a military background, looking at how some of our doctrine was, I'm like, this just wouldn't work. As soon we rely on having air superiority, we rely on having all this ISR asset, and not this small FPV drone by the hundreds or by the thousands taking us out in trenches, and doesn't matter what cover. The Western militaries have not caught up to the doctrine of this at all.
No, no. Look, I mean, the trench was a good idea in World War One and World War Two because the longest range was aviation that could drop bombs and artillery, right? But that still fires at an arc, and unless you are very, very unlucky and it just falls inside the trench, you're probably gonna be good. But a drone can just hover over you, drop a grenade, or FPV drone, you won't even hear it until it's on top of you. Like if you hear the FPV drone, it says like this mosquito sound. When you only hear it when it dives on you, and if it's diving on you, you are the target and you're gone. Like how you have a second to maybe go into cover if there's any available, and now you have to like build roofed trenches, which is very difficult, you know, especially in this weather. And so like if you think like you'll dig your little trench and be safe in there when the enemy has FPV drones, no, they will just kill you inside your trench, and your trench turns into a pre-dug grave, you know, like so. All this has to be adjusted, and I think it's going to become a lot more mobile instead of static in order to be effective, because if you are static, you are giving the enemy drones the ability to find you, hunt you, and kill you. So you have to be more mobile, and I think a lot of investment needs to be made in countermeasures, which exist, but they are big, bulky, and it's new tech, so it's unproven. But like, I mean, one thing we know is that necessity is the mother of invention, right? Or innovation. So the military industrial complex is just itching right now, developing, I'm sure, hundreds of different projects to come up with. I mean, Americans already have a Humvee mounted EW that can knock out drones, and you know, there's many possibilities. But yeah, in next 10 years, definitely this problem will be addressed, I think.
Yeah, I've even had people speculate if there's going to be some convention against like these FPV drones. I can't see how they would end up having something like this.
Wow, it's
Yeah, it doesn't make sense of how you'd
it's
actually.
it's a perfectly viable weapon. It's a
Of course,
perfectly viable weapon.
yeah,
The same like when they were saying like don't use trench shotguns. It's a perfectly viable weapon.
yeah,
Like why not?
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
a new tech. That's it.
yeah. And look at when new tech has come out in war, and people all jump up and down specifically about this. We saw it with even down to submarines. We saw it with planes. But it is something that is bloody scary on the front line.
What you can always rely on is humans' ability to come up with new ways to murder each other. We're amazing at it. So yeah, this is only the worst is yet to come. What is the worst, in my opinion, is that you realize that it's not just some fucking robot hunting you. There's a human controlling that, you know, and there's a human controlling that, doing all that stuff. So it's how easy and how detached it becomes, you know, because like the same thing. Like there was always a joke with the American drone operators bombing weddings with their Reapers, right? Like the guy is sitting somewhere in Iowa and he can bomb the Middle East, and it looks like it's just a video game, you know? And yeah, there
And
is very little value attached to pulling the trigger is a different thing than just playing a video game on a console, and you know, it becomes. It's very weird. I will leave that to philosophers to come up with some solutions for that. But yeah, it's very weird feeling.
oh, I bet that it is. It's crazy having that different experience from being on the trigger to flying a toy, I guess, into someone and kill. And
It is a toy. It is an explosive toy. That's all it is. These FPV drones were designed to be toys for like racing and stuff. You know,
yeah,
suddenly you put some C4 on that and some nails, and it becomes a frag grenade.
yeah. Oh, it's crazy. You spoke before about Bakmut and fighting Wagner as far as the most challenging troops to fight. What is your feelings, I guess, an overall opinion on what happened in Bakmut? Because as someone from outside looking in, what we saw was both sides pouring men and elements into that front line, pouring men in with sometimes very minimal experience and huge losses for somewhere that, from outside looking in, didn't seem that strategically important. We were told that if Bakmut fell, that through to Kramatorsk could be taken, but when Bakmut fell, since 12 months, we've basically seen no change. Um,
So
what is your opinion and
yeah,
your experience from that?
so one thing about Kramatorsk is Kramatorsk sits on a high ground,
Yeah.
and there's a big low ground between Bakhmut, and to force your way to Kramatorsk in a frontal assault would be impossible to do. You would have to envelop it and starve it out or something like that. It would be impossible to force because it's high ground and the artillery will obliterate you from the Kramatorsk side. So no, Bakhmut, basically, why Russians committed so much for that useless city, uh, I I think it's only for the propaganda reasons that we can was the idea, because it offered little to no strategic uh, advantage or value, really. I mean, some people say because Soledar has like salt mines, and it's salt mines, how much money you expect to make out of salt mines, right? But yeah, strategically speaking, it didn't have much value. It didn't cut off any Ukrainian supply lines. It didn't. And even if it did, the ratio of win and lose, like that many people, and lose Wagner for Bakhmut was just a horrible decision. On the Ukrainian side, Bakhmut was a diversion. Bakhmut was a fixing solution because all this time that the active fighting was going on in the outskirts, so my unit was the first from the Legion to enter Soledar, even before Bakhmut began. First was Soledar, and I was there like 7, 8 months in Bakhmut, Soledar and Bakhmut, and the idea from the very beginning was not we die in Bakhmut defending. No, we were like, we're going to milk this as long as possible. Like make them pay for every meter, okay? Just attrition, 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 attrition. And that's what we did. Why? During all this time, we did not see any Russian assaults anywhere because they overcommitted in Bakhmut fully. And when your enemy is making a mistake, you do not interrupt them, right? So with a very minimum force, we defended it as long as possible because it was never our goal to hold the fucking city because it was evacuated already fully. It was a barren, empty city of just 5-story Soviet buildings, and we just sat there and killed as many as we could until they finally broke the flanks and enveloped, and we had to pull out. But that took fucking 9 months or 10 months, And in this time, we took back Kherson. We made them like a beachhead into the southern part of the river, and all these moves. And what we won, most important time, because in this time came the Leopards, they came the Abramses, and now F-16s are on the way. And it's like Napoleon used to say that it's always viable to trade territory for time, because territory you can get back, but time you can never get back. And Bakhmut served its purpose. It took the attention of the Russians. It destroyed and like broke in half their most efficient fighting force, and it gave us time to get all the Western tanks and stuff that we needed. So it served its purpose from our perspective. But why they sacrificed so much for that city, I mean, the military analysts will be talking about that for the next 200 years, in my opinion, because it made no sense. It made no sense to me. They could have just done what they did in Severodonetsk and just obliterated, which they had to do in the end. There is nothing standing in Bakhmut anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. But on the contrary to that, you could make an argument to say that well, it wasn't that, we were told it wasn't strategically important for Ukraine. We know that Ukraine poured huge amounts of manpower and military power into Bakmut for its
No, no,
defense over months and months.
no. We didn't really put all that many manpower. It was really uh, mostly done by most of the work was done by higher tier units like the SOFs and Legion. And what we did was we would take key points and make like hellish defense there, kill as many as we could before we were forced to finally pull back and set up a new such kill zone, you know. But they were really inside the Bakhmut. I mean, on the outskirts, yeah, there were a lot of land forces troops deployed, of course. But the idea that inside the city we made it look like that we were going to fight tooth and claw for this fucking city, but the idea was that we baited them in, we made them waste time, we made them waste resources, we made them waste a lot of their good fighting force. But honestly, most of the operations we were doing was like 12 to 16 man teams, several teams working night raids. You know, there were no large Ukrainian defense efforts because we never overcommitted like that. But of course, the media was being told that information that, yeah, we're going to put 50,000 people in there, but it's because for the Russians to take that bait. But really, what Bakhmut did, it served its purpose. It was a false gap, basically. Let them crush themselves onto this city while guys like me were doing night raids because they had no night vision capabilities. So they would just take some little building, and at night they got a knock from me, you know, with knots, and that's it. You know, they were like blind and unable to do anything. So most of the fighting was that in Bakhmut, as well as like artillery. You place somebody like me, for example, in a high-rise building, then I can see their movements. All I need is a $300 tablet and a $100 radio to accurately call in fire and just obliterate them. I think I've killed more of them with that tablet and radio than any weapon system that I've ever had. You know, it was like they like to concentrate a lot of their forces in very obvious buildings, like a fire station, you know, and they put their HQ there and they put their weapons, munitions there, like for artillery. And I see guys running out of there with boxes taken into the artillery pieces, right? And like if I see that from 2 clicks away with the binoculars, or I had a very good team sniper with the Barrett watching that and just relaying that information to me. All I have to do is locate it on the map, send the coordinates, and then just HIMARS, and that's it, you know.
And over, 2022, we saw Bakhmut fall early in the year, and then we had the long-awaited Ukrainian counteroffensive that your teams, your guys were involved in, and these offensives didn't come to the end, to the fruition that a lot of people hoped. What do you think was the problems faced there, and why these didn't make the ground, or the extent that people thought these were going to make? What was the downfalling there?
Well, a lot of people, like when I was in Georgia, the media was asking me about this whole counteroffensive thing. And look, the people have this idea that at an appointed time, somebody will blow a whistle and everybody jumps out of the trench and charges. That's not how modern warfare works, you know, in the age of drones and robots, right? So no, the idea was that they started to probe even as far as I would say April. Yeah, April, May period. Yeah, even in April, the focus was the south, obviously, because that's the key to. We wanted to cut the land bridge and sever the southern portion of the enemy land, and we started to probe with artillery, with insertions, etc., etc. What we found was that because the West was dragging its feet, providing proper Western armor and equipment, Russians had 1 full year to dig in. And they dug in, and they dug in well. I mean, they have 5 lines of defenses. It's basically, at this point, I do not know what kind of force you need to penetrate that with a land assault. You know, unless you have complete air superiority that can silence the enemy artillery, so your engineers can get closer to clear all this. I mean, it's just to see the scale of that. There's a very good video made by, I believe, Kings and Generals, maybe, or Invicta, either or the 2 channels. There's like the company's level of defenses in one trench, one portion, in one little grid square, right? And you will see like the 5 lines of defense. It's ludicrous to think that penetrating something like that can happen in months. It will not happen in months. What the way the Russians are organized is that they have some people inside the trench line and like constantly on defense, and these are generally the lower tier troops that they are willing to sacrifice to drones and artillery. They don't care. They're just warm bodies that shoot back like this, you know. But behind that, they have mobile reserves. Those mobile reserves are like professional soldiers in their mechanized units, and they get activated. Okay, this section is under attack, and they respond to that, countercharge, etc., etc., etc. The way I see it, the proper way to attempt anything would be to strain that mobile reserve so much. If you have the long range capability to destroy them while they are in the back, all the better. That's where all those long-range HIMARS, ATACMS, I think they're called, come in, and the F-16s and etc., because they can penetrate deeper and fire at those mobile reserves. But otherwise, because the West has not provided those things yet. I mean, up until this point, when was the actual counter-offensive taking place? We didn't have those available. So all we had, or the only option we had, was to strain their ability to respond. So instead of making one big push in a weak spot, we had to make like 7 different ones, you know, with smaller forces, which are less effective, in order to make their mobile reserves fail to respond effectively. So that's the idea, and that takes a lot of time. But you have now in they made a little push, but understand that something like that happened in one location. It's a very small patch of land, and there's still like 3 lines of defense behind that. You know, so now, I mean, a lot hangs on the arrival of F-16s and ATACMS, because when this horrendous weather is finally over and I can hopefully see the sun once again in 6 months, we're going to definitely, in my opinion, try to hit their mobile reserves before we actually commit to an attack, to make sure that, okay, they cannot respond effectively, and then maybe something will change. But we'll see how that shakes out. Obviously, there's a lot smarter people than me sitting up there making those decisions. So, yeah. But yeah, the concept that people have that, okay, Ukraine got Abrams and Leopard, now they can go all the way to Crimea. And no, it's not Call of Duty. You know, lives are at stake. Any mistake you make, any push you make, there are people dying, you know. And unlike Russia, we don't have people to spare. You know, like we value people. We have much smaller population, and each soldier has a lot more value than the Russian conscript that they got from prison that they want to get rid of anyway.
Right. Is there anything that you think Ukraine does poorly? Anything you think they need to improve?
Like a lot has been improved from the beginning, because now they are far more Western minded in terms of doctrines and tactics. And like Ukraine adopted the Western small unit tactics to perfection. that is something that just happened in front of my eyes, of going from like basically no briefings to having actual S2 do its job and give you a briefing and aerial surveillance imagery, and like getting like at least a team like mine is getting a target package. Not like in the beginning, the enemy is 30 kilometers that way. Au revoir. No, that kind yeah. It's coming down to like a lot more organized and a lot more combined arms, which is the most important thing in modern warfare, is your ability to combine your assets into a cohesive operation. So that Ukraine has picked up a lot. I think like my advice would be to implement more Western brains into the planning stages, especially at higher levels. Because like they bring perception and ideas that may not occur to you because you have a tunnel vision when you're doing all this stuff, right? So I think that would be one thing. I mean, what else? I mean, really, most of my issues that I had in the beginning have pretty much been solved in terms of tactics, because now they like for the last year and a half, they've realized that, okay, if you put the Westerners here, for example, and let them do it their way, okay, it usually works out, because the NATO structure, it's basically the same for every country that participates in it. An operation written by a Portuguese general, I will read and understand and do, because it's the same structure. It may be some varying commands and hand signals, but that can be ironed out in process, But there was, in the beginning, there was a huge difference how we thought, and I'm counting we as in my generation of Georgians brought up with the American instruction, and how the Ukrainian doctrine worked, which was largely still based on the mechanized warfare of the Soviet Union. But now it's all very Western. It's very Westernized, and it's working much better now.
Yeah. And have you run into any problems? We keep hearing about from all levels, corruption, from money coming in from the States, from weapons being stolen. What has been your experience with this? And I like to ask everyone this individually, because it seems that people have varying, but you're open with me. What has been your experience?
So, I mean, Ukraine has a reputation for corruption, right? But I think it's being blown out of proportion, because the Western understanding of corruption and the Eastern understanding of corruption are two completely different things. Like I was talking with the All Gillied Up podcast about this, and I explained to those boys that what you call corruption in the Eastern Bloc, we call life. So what a Ukrainian would consider corruption would be, if I go to a doctor and there's a queue for surgery, so I pay him money to put me up the queue, that's bribery, that's corruption, you go to jail, okay? But if I go to my doctor and I bring him a nice bottle of whiskey, right? In Sweden, you go to jail for that, because that's corruption. But here, it's expected. Same in Georgia. Same in Moldova, same in, I don't know, any of the post-Soviet countries, honestly, it's the same, because that's just the way of life here. Quid pro quo is the way anything is done in the eastern part of Europe. And yeah, I understand how for a Frenchman or a Swede or an American, that would be completely, bananas. But here, it's just the way it works. And a lot of Westerners were very surprised to find that out. But people like me, for example, or the Georgians much older than me, who went through that period and were raised in that period, for them, that was just normal. So you will not hear Georgians talking about that as much as you will hear Americans. Just for them, that's a big surprise. Whereas for the Eastern Bloc, that's just normal. In terms of like weapons being sold and things like that, I have never seen that in action myself. because I spent most of my time either, if I'm on downtime, I'm in the gym or training, and then I sent to frontline for the next 6 months. And like, I don't really experience that, because anything I get directly either from volunteer donations who come to me and give it to me in hands, or I call the HQ if I need something, and I drive there and I get it from themselves. So there's like, I can't lose anything on the way. But I've heard the stories, of course, but I cannot vouch for those. But the fact that there is obviously, like, how do I put this? Allocation of resources is a problem. That is definitely a thing, because it comes down to who is put on what positions depending on who is available. A lot of good guys who were like good officers, for example, at the beginning of the war were junior officers. They're majors now, so they get kicked up.
Yeah.
And then you get people who did not get kicked up put in certain positions that, in my opinion, shouldn't be there, because they don't have the experience, they don't have the blah 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 blah. But I mean, that to me is a problem that every army has.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's more pronounced in the West, in the Eastern Bloc. Same in Georgia, because meritocracy is a completely new concept in our culture. You understand?
Yeah.
In our culture, for example, because we're very family oriented and all that, in the cultures of the Eastern European countries, for example, if I have a private company, let's say LTD Viking, right, and I have a cousin that doesn't have a job and I do not give him preferential treatment, I will lose a family member, and the rest of my family will think I'm a piece of shit because I did not help my family member. Maybe my cousin is a terrible pick for the job, but that's a decision I have to make. If I don't pick him for the job, it's gonna be creating an issue. And that's how this whole thing, it's the same goes for friends, etc. Whereas in Sweden, you will not hire your mother unless she's the best of the best, right? So it's a different mentality, and a lot of what Western media screams about corruption is just blown out of proportion from the Western perspective. But here, an average Ukrainian would just say, he hired his cousin. Like, what was he supposed to do? Not do that? Like, like, it's very different mentalities that it'll take, like, once this country joins the EU, eventually, it'll take like 30 years for that generation to just die out and the generation raised in the EU to come up with EU values. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. And I think, and you'll be far more knowledgeable on this than I, but I've listened and read a fair bit about people that grew up in the Soviet Union, and people need to remember the Soviet Union was not long ago, and there's generations in countries like Ukraine that grew up in the Soviet Union where
Yes.
resources as food and everything was so barren and bare that there was a degree of corruption and trading almost just to be able to eat. There was a defected KGB spy talking on Lex Friedman's podcast about this. It is like the idea of theft and trading from bread and everything. He's like, that we did that so we could eat. And he said that sort of gets instilled culturally, and it takes a long time for them actually to move forward about how this works when you've got the people and the government as this very separate enterprise, and it doesn't fix in 30 years.
So there's a famous joke in Georgia that the fall of the Soviet Union was caused by Hollywood. Do you know about this?
No, tell us about it.
So like, it wasn't the failed Afghanistan war, it wasn't the space race, it was the first time the bootleg Hollywood movies came into the Soviet Union. And you know how in Hollywood movies there's always a scene when they open the fridge and it's fucking full?
Yeah.
And that was just mind-blowing to my father's generation, like, and my father's not old, he's like 49 years old, but like, people who were growing up in that era, I mean, they had to smuggle I don't know, Freddie Mercury songs and Beatles and stuff like that. And then the movies started to come in, like the Terminator and all this fucking cool 80s and 90s, I mean, 70s and 80s movies. And like there were shops and gas stations full of whatever the fuck you want. And then there was like people like an average American family, father comes back from work and opens the fridge and it's like a six-pack of beer and food and everything. And that was fucking crazy for us, you know. So that was the joke, is that that's what caused the fall of the Soviet Union, because people wanted food in the fridge constantly, right? And there is truth to that, let me tell you, because the Soviet Union was built on a lie. The whole system was built on a lie. Everybody lied to everybody, you know, just to fill the quotas on paper. Everybody lied to everybody, and everybody had to steal something to eat at the end of the day, because this idea of collective only works on paper. It never works in reality, never has worked and never will work, because it's against human nature, you know. And that's just how it works. There's also another joke I'll tell you about the farmer, milk farmer. So let's call him John for simplicity's sake. So basically, Soviet Union, right? And there's this village that has cows and they make milk. So the Soviets come in and say that, okay, from now on, each milk farmer has to turn in 10 liters of milk at the end of this month. And yeah, 10 liters normal. First month, all good. Second month, they say 30 liters. And everybody complains, like, 30 liters, are you kidding me? What can I feed my family with, you know? And everybody complains except John. John says, yeah, no problem, 30 liters, nothing. The time comes, everybody's short 30 liters except John. He's got his 30 liters right there. So they give him a medal and call him the great communist, right? And they say next month, 60 liters. Everybody complains except John. He says, yeah, no problem. The time comes, everybody's short. John's got his 60 liters. He gave him another medal. Everything is, he meets Stalin, you know, everybody's fucking praising him. And they say next month 100 liters, and nobody says anything because, you know, it's pointless except John. John says, yeah, that's gonna be a problem. And they're like, John, you've been such a good communist all this time, and now you are going to start complaining. He says, no, I'll bring it, but at this point it's gonna be only water. Because yeah, he filled the quota by putting 1 liter of milk and the rest was water, you know. Like, so that was in every industry, at every position, and in everything. Like they decided that Georgia was a good place to grow tea. We don't have the humidity, we don't have the environment for tea. We grow wine because it's a good place for wine, you know, but it's not a good place for tea. So we for 70 years they forced Georgia to grow tea instead of grapes, and made like horrendously bad tea, just because some fucking bureaucrat in Moscow decided, where can we grow tea? Georgia, why the fuck not? Because it's incompetent people making those decisions, right? So yeah, it's a very failed system, and its effects are still lingering.
Well, but that's what you see in those systems where you don't have competency put forward. And I think probably one of the best examples of this is actually in the HBO series Chernobyl, where you see
I haven't seen it.
the nuclear power plant, but the people put in charge of Chernobyl, these are just people put in charge by the communist government. But it's like, well, none of this would have happened if these were nuclear scientists. And I think, as far as my brief understanding compared to someone like yourself, the Soviet Union, it breaks down really well of, this is how the command structure worked here. These people weren't put here for competency. They were moved here just for study who their family was or what power they've got, rather than that. You spoke twice earlier on in this about the failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I think, and I'll misquote you, but it was like the weak leadership in the US leading up to this invasion and then throughout. How do you think things would have been different have the administration, sorry, in Washington being different for Ukraine?
Oh, I'll be very clear about that. There would be no war if there was Trump in the White House right now. The Donald Trump. Now, I'm not a big Trump fanboy, honestly. Like I like his jokes and his mean tweets. He's very entertaining. But the isolation policy of the U.S. I don't agree with. But locally, he was doing some good work. Most importantly, he really improved and brought back the U.S. military to its former strength. Little known fact, actually, that in Syria, Trump became the first president who bombed the fuck out of Russians. He approved an airstrike on Wagner troops, and as a result, like 200 plus Wagners were slaughtered in that. And Russia kind of understood what it means to come head to head with Uncle Sam. Like a lot of people who talk about geopolitics and military do not understand what the United States military means. Like most people simply cannot understand what that means. One carrier, one super carrier. United States has 11 super carriers, that only United States has. United States has the capability to deliver full invasion in any country within 24 hours. I mean, it's a completely different level of just one carrier strike group has more military potency than entire countries. And I'm not even talking about like tiny banana republics. I'm talking like proper European countries, So people don't understand what the United States military truly means. That if there was a conventional war between US and Russia, the United States could just wipe out any strike ability of Russia within a week, like just by its naval capacity, right? And people just, when I say that, they're like, no, you don't understand the technological difference that that the military of the United States has. Only if they use just the weapons produced by Lockheed Martin would be enough. Just that company. Like it's a completely different level of military.
I think there is a bit of a misunderstanding of how powerful the American military actually is compared to other nations. And on my joint exercises I've done with the Yanks, it's like Australia has a ginger cat's always crazy, but the best.
I have three here and 4 in Georgia.
Oh wow.
I'm a big cat person.
Yeah. That the Americans have, and Australia is a powerful military country, considering the population. And America has more special forces soldiers than Australia does just troops. Well, it's just insane.
It's not just about the more. It's just American Navy alone can take on the rest of the world and win. And I'm talking no nukes. And if we're taking nukes into consideration, I did the math, and just by submarine-launched ICBMs, United States can deliver 2,700 something warheads anywhere in the world like that.
Yeah.
2,700. Yeah. And like just by submarines, nothing else. So it's a little bit different of a weight class in its own. So back to your question, Trump remains the only president in the recent history during whose presidency Putin did not dare invade anyone. Because during the presidency of every other president, there was war waged by Russia somewhere, be it Chechnya, be it Georgia 4 times, Ukraine during Obama, and etc. And I mean, I'm 100% sure that this invasion was emboldened by the presence of very weak president with the guy can't complete a sentence. I mean, it's embarrassing, just very, very disappointing. And I will also tell you that in the beginning of the war, until we won the Battle of Kiev, and it became evident that this war would continue, the United States was very suspiciously quiet. We didn't receive anything from the United States until we won the Battle of Kiev. I mean, Boris Johnson had to pick up the leadership of the Western world and provide aid to Ukraine. And after we won the Battle of Kiev, and it became evident that this would continue, of course, then the Biden administration began supporting Ukraine. And there are reasons behind that that I'm not going to put my tinfoil hat now on and get canceled. I would never kill myself, Hillary Clinton. But like, yeah, but you understand where I'm coming from. Trump, you never know what Trump is going to do. He doesn't know. The way he does things depends on how good his coffee is in the morning, which is a level of unpredictability that Putin hates. Putin is usually 2 steps ahead of the Western leaders because he doesn't have to worry about internal anything. He has no opposition, so And Trump was like probably the one guy that nobody can anticipate. You have no idea what he's going to do in the next 20 minutes, right? I remember that time he was on some media meeting and he had women in the audience who were harassed by Bill Clinton when he was debating Hillary Clinton. I mean, he made some of the most like ridiculous moves, the out of box, and you never know. Maybe this invasion will begin and he would say, "Not my problem." Maybe he would perceive it that somebody's trying to demonstrate the bigger dick than mine, and we would have fucking 82nd Airborne paratrooping on 25th of February. You don't know, and Putin doesn't know, so he would. That's why in the 4 years Trump was president, he was very, very quiet. And I believe it's because of the very weak foreign policy of the U.S. By the Biden administration and the completely embarrassing situation that was in Afghanistan very much put the final nail in the coffin of this decision making of this invasion. That's my modest opinion.
Yeah. But what do you think of if Trump does get back in later this year? Because he'd come out and publicly said, "I'll end the war within 24 hours." And
God knows.
if you try and end the war within any time frame, Ukraine has to secede land. Like if you want to end the war tomorrow, there has to be accession land.
Okay, in terms of the Western powers, they would rather the war finish today as it is. I'm talking Scholz's and Macron's, right? But then again, you have a population of 54 million or something in Ukraine, and the country that is not willing to surrender, okay? So even if they pull all the funding, right, that doesn't mean that the war will end. We will fight as long as we have bullets to fight with, and when we run out of bullets, I'll take my axe and fight with that. There is no way I'm accepting bad peace, as in I've lost countless friends in this war, people I fought with before, and like I cannot accept any ceasefire that does not involve a victory. You understand? I spent too much blood here, too much time. I cannot go back to my country because I get fucking murdered in the airport by the pro-Russian government. I invested everything in this, and I'm going to see it through. And that's what everybody thinks. And now we have a whole generation of kids who became adults in this war, and they are like standing in the enlistment offices going to war. So we are facing an existential threat. To us, it's not a politics game. So I don't know if Trump does this, Trump does that. Sure, it will have a massive effect what the United States does, of course. But to think that Ukraine will accept secession of lands, no. Most worst case scenario, the conflict would freeze the way it was until the invasion. There was always skirmishes in the east and in the east, always, and with the Donbass, with the separatists, there was always skirmishes, and that will continue to happen. But without HIMARSes, there will be much limited capacity on our side, and it will be another 5 years until Russia gets back on its feet, and it's all over again, because it seems the West is not learning from its mistakes, that the appeasement to dictators and tyrants just does not work. It just emboldens the bullies, So, yeah.
Well, mate, I think that might be a good place to leave it, on the note that Ukraine and guys like yourself will not stop fighting. Mate, thank you. Thanks very much for. I know it's very late where you are after a big day at shooting. So really massive thank you.
Yeah.
I do really
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
for having me, man.
No, what are those for people that haven't been to Ukraine? The big thing in Ukraine is Georgian food, and Georgian food
Oh, yeah.
is amazing. Is it kankali? They're like a dumpling.
Khinkali, yes.
Khinkali. Oh
Khinkali.
man, I need to come back to Ukraine just to eat that, or go to Georgia.
Yeah. Bro, the Georgia is a tiny country with enormous culinary culture. Like it's the best food in the world, in my opinion, because it's a small country. It has 9 districts, and each district has its own culture and its own cuisine that's completely different from the other. Like just the khachapuri, the cheese bread that we have, there's like 8 variations of it in each region. So and it's very popular here. To go to Georgia. There's more Georgian restaurants in Kiev than it is in Georgia.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So to us, it's nothing unusual. So I would rather like I go to Puzata Khata, which is like the Ukrainian restaurant here because I like to, try new things. Because khinkali, I've been eating khinkali since I left the womb. So, and I'm from the mountain region where it's only khinkali because nothing grows on the side of the cliff, so it's all beef. So yeah, it's all meat, and yeah, so yeah, Georgian restaurant is but you need to know where to go. In Kiev, there are many. In Kharkiv, I was very disappointed. Actually, I didn't find a good one, but Kiev has a lot to offer in terms of Georgian food, definitely.
Amazing. Now, brother, is there anything before we log off that you would like to plug? Any last messages or anything we've forgotten that you'd like to mention?
I would say that to mostly to your Western listeners, I suppose that I understand that, but for example, many Americans think that okay, we're sending so much support in the country there, and we have like veterans on the streets and roads not built and etc etc. I understand that argument perfectly, and it's a very logical position to have. However, I would remind to them that if you appease the bully, he's going to go further and further, and they're already saying that they are willing to go to Poland, etc. So unless you are willing to have United States troops fighting in Poland and the Baltics defending NATO countries, this is where we can break this cancer, this empire of evil. And all you have to do is pay a little money in it. And it's, believe me, very, very cheap compared to what you would have to do if you have to fight Russia head on in Europe, and then rebuild all of that. So the people that say that, oh, this is too expensive, no, it's the fraction of the defense budget of the United States or the European countries, and you are not losing any blood, and your houses are not being bombed. So, consider that as well, because if we do not stop them here, we will have to fight them in Berlin, we will have to fight them in Madrid. They will never stop because it is an empire of evil. And as Putin said, he believes that the Russia's borders do not end anywhere. So, it's a decision you have to make. Would you rather me fight and you give me bullets, or you will have to send your sons and daughters to do it because I'm already dead because you didn't support me? That's basically it.
Yeah. Well, mate, we wish you all the best, and I'm sure we'll speak again at some point. And if people want to follow you, I'll link whatever down below as well.
Mhm.
Easy.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you.